Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely hope you're having a good day wherever you are and are ready to pick up some tidbits of knowledge. Here at Submission Audio, we've had a whirlwind 1.5 months since the launch of Flatline, our proprietary clipping plugin. To say that the Flatline launch was a success would be to underplay it, and it's thanks to many of you, our loyal community. You may have noticed that we've started rolling out site accounts with appended loyalty discounts for members. This is something I felt very passionately about since the very beginning, but we can only implement it now. The loyalty and ongoing support of our community is number one, and in my opinion, it should never be a one-way street. That aside, one of the emerging issues since our launch of Flatline was the emerging understanding that many people misunderstand clipping or outright don't actually know what it is. This video aims to rectify that. Your average loudness limiter is a tool that functions very much like a compressor at extremes. Think of your garden variety compressor working with an attack of around 0.1 milliseconds, release as long as you want it, though usually very short, with a ratio of 20 up to infinity. This results in the classic squashed sound, where the waveform is dragged down every time it exceeds the threshold. While that sound can impart a lot of excitement to the music, you've probably realized that it starts to sound quite congested, usually well before you reach the volume level that you actually want. Enter clipping. Clipping in the early days was discovered as pretty much an accident. It would occur whenever a signal hit analog to digital converters too hard and the peaks ended up being chopped off. This fundamentally worked differently to limiting because rather than the waveform being dragged down, the tops were quite simply shaved off. This had a two-pronged effect. Firstly, if a sustained signal was chopped too much, you would hear a sort of pervading aliasing distortion. Secondly, if it mostly hit drum peaks, people realized that their mixes in the end would actually retain more punch. The reason the drums would remain punchy even after clipping is because it essentially fools the digital to analog converter. It forces it to basically brain fart, overshoot, and recreate a faux peak on reproduction towards your speakers. This happens because square waves, perfect square waves anyway, cannot exist in the analog domain for reasons that we won't get into in this video. Safe to say that clipping primes your DAC to overshoot and actually gives you more transient content after the mastering process. This of course became highly desirable in mastering, where people were wanting ever louder levels while still retaining the punch in their music. This led to the widespread adoption of converter clipping in world-class mastering houses. Whereas once facilities would have spent tens of thousands of dollars accruing a collection of different limiters, they were now investing that money in high-quality analog to digital converters. This allowed them to push the mixers out of their mastering rack back into the ADC and basically gain the level by clipping it on the way back in, retaining all that punch and giving you that radio-ready sound that we all knew throughout the 2000s. Generally speaking, the high quality units would have more pleasant clipping with less audible aliasing distortion. Now, enter the 2000s and the software in the box era. As much as we had gained by moving in the box, we unfortunately lost an equal amount. One of the aforementioned losses was the sound of converter clipping on the way back into the system. Software digital clipping was harsh and unforgiving. In fact, you're already probably well familiar with this sound. You likely would have heard it completely by accident. It's the sound that you hear when your tracks in your digital audio workstation go well into the red and start to crackle like mad. This is what's called hard clipping, and this is actually the setting that Flatline defaults to when you first boot it up. It's in fact the setting that just about every properly coded software clipper has had, well, nigh on since 20 years ago when I used my very first one. So why would we default Flatline to start in this pretty unflattering state? Well, because it represents the extreme endpoint and allows the user to work backwards, dialing in the musical qualities after they've achieved the level, much as I showed you last time as we mastered Pliny's impulse voices using Flatline. See, the magic in the converter clipping process was that those converters, due to their analog circuitry, would actually soften the clipping curve on the way in. They would essentially saturate it, so it wasn't hard clipping that you were hearing. In Flatline, that magic is recreated with the shape knob. We spent months testing different curves and different algorithms until we arrived at a sound that I felt was perfect for mastering based on my personal workflow. Being a career mastering engineer myself and a beta test team full of professional long-time engineers, we felt we had a great cadre of individuals to help us fine-tune this thing to absolute perfection. When my mastering mentor, who was part of the beta test team, came to me and said, "I don't know what kind of magic you guys have pulled with this, but 9 times out of 10, I prefer it to clipping my very expensive, very famous brand of analog to digital converters," I knew we'd hit it out of the park. Flatline gives you a very wide range of possibilities with the shape knob, but I usually find myself hovering between around 90 and 95%. maybe a little higher on super congested, super fast material like technical metal, and maybe a little lower on acoustic material that's less percussive. Furthermore, if aliasing is of great concern, Flatline also comes with an oversampling feature which can reduce it. However, the classic sound of clipping is actually the sound of not oversampled clipping, so again, I would advise you to set the shape just right because that's where the crux of it is. Circling back to hard clipping, we would only ever advise using Flatline under extreme settings, that is, shape at 100% with no oversampling, under very specific circumstances. I occasionally, very infrequently, find myself using it on the back end of a master when I've already achieved the bulk of the volume through other means, and I want to very transparently raise the material another half dB or so. Hard clipping, believe it or not, can actually be a tremendous way of achieving this. The caveat, of course, being that you need to know how to work around the heavy crackling that it introduces, which is of course why we retain this option for you in Flatline. As a token of good faith, we're now going to show you how to create your own hard clipper. We're going to show you the code needed. This one is a doozy, so buckle up for some heavy reading. If sample is greater than threshold, then sample equals threshold. Now, I know that we aren't all mathematical geniuses, so I hope you're able to retain all of that information. Hard clipping is one of the easiest algorithms to execute in all of audio production. It's why many plugin companies get their start with a clipper plugin. They can quite literally be coded in an afternoon by a high school student. However, the wave shape functions that actually make the clipper sound like the good sounding converter units being clipped, well, that's a very different story entirely. Don't ask us though, because we're hanging on to our 11 secret herbs and spices, at least for the time being. I hope you've enjoyed this brief run through of the history of clipping and why we all love it so much, whether or not we know it. You're now equipped to start clipping responsibly and also understand how powerful the shape knob in Flatline actually is. For those who are unsure, that's exactly why we offer a free, no obligation 7-day demo that you can try at your own leisure, so you can see if it works for you. At the end of our last video, where I went over the process of mastering Pliny's new record, Impulse Voices, I made a silly little jab about getting your information from industry professionals rather than people who yell at a camera for a living. This was a fun-loving poke at my many content creator friends here on YouTube. Little did I know how prophetic this would turn out to be. We live in crazy times where just about anybody with the time and a platform can make all sorts of misleading claims. This isn't just true of audio engineering, but the wider world as a whole. I would urge you, as you learn more about the art of making music, that you refer to the industry heavyweights in this business to do so. My good friends Ola Englund, Glenn Fricker and Ryan Bruce are some of the heavyweights here on YouTube that create great quality content. If you want to learn about the art of mixing music, my old book, The Systematic Mixing Guide, has helped tens of thousands of engineers kickstart their careers over the last decade. Finally, my friends over at the Unstoppable Recording Machine run an exemplary online college with a massive user base featuring some of my close colleagues and friends such as Adam Nolly Getgood, Mick Gordon, Aaron Marshall, Andy Marsh, amongst many others. We put our knowledge out there as a resource for you, and you're more than welcome to use it, even if we do occasionally tag an advertisement for Flatline into the middle of it. Until next time, where I show you guys more of the specific ins and outs of the mastering process, we'll see you later.